Biogeochemical cycles are processes that transfer and transform, transport major chemicals throughout an environment. The four major biogeochemical cycles are the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle, the phosphorus cycle, and the water cycle. We are not going to cover the water cycle this semester. We are going to focus on the other three. You should have a handout for each of the cycles in your study guide packet. For each of the cycles, I'm going to go through them briefly because they are literally arrows showing the movement from reactants to products or beginning of the cycle, end of the cycle. So it will be your responsibility to go through those in a little bit more detail. You will need to know the major sources of the different chemicals, so sources of carbon, phosphorus, and nitrogen, natural and man-made sources, and also which versions of these chemicals are available to living organisms and which ones are biological molecules that are important. For some of them, you may also need to know the organisms that are involved in the transfer or the transition of the organism from an inorganic to an organic form. I will mention those. You'll see them on the slide. So if it says bacteria do this process, you need to know that it's bacteria. You don't need to know what kind of bacteria unless specifically stated, but you do need to know if there is a living organism involved. So the reason that we study these biogeochemical cycles is that all of these chemicals that we are going to study, carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus, are absolutely critical for living organisms. In the natural processes, all of these are found in the environment and cycled through the environment via living organisms, up through the food chain, broken down by decomposers, released back into the soil, taken back up by plants. So the carbon cycle is probably the biggest one, the most important one, because carbon is going to be our energy source. Ultimately, carbon dioxide is converted into glucose during photosynthesis, and that is the source of all of our chemical energy. We talked about greenhouse gases and briefly mentioned some sources of carbon dioxide. Natural carbon dioxide is produced by respiration and decomposition. So outside of human activities, carbon dioxide is naturally released by living organisms. You breathe out carbon dioxide, you breathe in oxygen. When living matter dies, it is decomposed and carbon dioxide is released, or carbon molecules are transferred. Carbon is found in the non-living parts of organisms, so shells of marine organisms. It's also found in rock, in limestone deposits. Other natural sources of carbon dioxide are volcanoes and hot springs, but human releases of carbon dioxide mainly come from burning fossil fuels. So carbon dioxide is the most significant of our greenhouse gases. Another major source of carbon dioxide is from deforestation. So when forests are felled, they are very often burned, either immediately or during the process of converting them into a useful product. So the carbon dioxide in the plant material is released as well. When land is cleared for agriculture, it is usually burned. So the process of releasing carbon in that case is basically twofold. We'll come back to that. But not only are you burning organic matter and releasing greenhouse gases, but you are also removing the organisms that are supposed to be taking carbon dioxide out of the environment. So you can see here the different sources and transfer of carbon. So a major source of carbon is going to be in our soil. So as organisms die, they are decomposed by our detritivores and our decomposers, and that organic matter through millions of years is converted into coal, oil, and natural gas. The dead organic matter in the soil also contains carbon dioxide. When we release fossil fuels and burn fossil fuels, all of us, are releasing carbon dioxide that is otherwise unavailable to living organisms because it's locked down in the rocks thousands of feet below sometimes, and would not have been released had it not been for humans releasing it back into the atmosphere. And remember, the more carbon dioxide we have, the warmer it gets because of the greenhouse effect. So decomposition and respiration should also be releasing carbon dioxide as part of the natural cycle. Our natural cycle continues with photosynthesis. Plants pull carbon dioxide out of the air or out of the water, wherever they happen to be, fix it into glucose and then into their structure, such as their cell walls and other organic molecules. We also get algae. When algae dies, algae is bringing carbon dioxide in through photosynthesis, but also when it dies, it falls down and enters the sediment where it can eventually be locked up in our coal, oil, and natural gas. So from the ocean, we get respiration, photosynthesis as well. But then, of course, we get the burning of fossil fuels. This is not just factories. This is gasoline, so burning it in your car, and a whole variety of other industrial processes that release carbon dioxide and other sources of carbon, such as methane. Methane, which is not specifically shown here, is released in a variety of ways as well. One of the biggest is by gas from agricultural animals, so cattle, etc. So as you raise more cattle, they produce more methane with their cow farts and release methane greenhouse gas into the atmosphere. So normally that's a natural process, but when we increase our raising of cattle and our meat consumption, then we are also going to be increasing methane in the environment. Phosphorus is a key nutrient. It is a key ingredient in our DNA molecules and sometimes in our proteins as well, but absolutely in DNA. Plants absorb hydrogen phosphate from the soil. It passes through the food chain just like carbon does until decomposers recycle it. But it is a limiting nutrient in most aquatic environments. So aquatic productivity is going to be limited by phosphorus. It has to be put back into the soil by decomposers. Those decomposers are going to convert it back into organic forms that can be used by living organisms, by plants that pull it up out of the soil or out of the water. One of the problems with phosphorus is that it is often found in fertilizers and other pollutants. So phosphorus can be artificially pumped into the environment by agricultural runoff, which is going to essentially upset the balance of living organisms. So we can end up with eutrophication, which we have mentioned earlier. We'll come back to again in just a second. Phosphorus is also released by geological uplift and weathering of rocks to release phosphate back into the soil. So as rocks break down, as they are crushed, as water percolates through them and dissolves some of the nutrients, phosphorus can be released back into the soil. One of the major problems with phosphorus and with nitrogen is a process called eutrophication. So eutrophication is when elevated levels of nutrients basically cause an algae bloom and increase the number of algal organisms living in an aquatic environment. The problem with this is that the algae or the phytoplankton or whatever it happens to be increases really, really quickly, sucks up all of the nutrients in the area and including oxygen. So it basically suffocates the other living organisms. If the algae is floating on top of the water, it can block out sunlight and can reduce the primary production of the native plants in a particular area. There are probably lots of local examples of eutrophication. Our textbook example is eutrophication of Lake Erie in 1960s due to fertilizer runoff. So the problem here again is that the algae overgrowth that is stimulated by the phosphorus can deplete the surrounding waters of oxygen and other nutrients and kill all of the organisms that live in that area. Along with phosphorus, nitrogen is often a limiting nutrient for plant growth. It is important because it is found in several of our biologically important molecules, proteins, nucleic acids, and chlorophyll. So bioavailable nitrogen is really important for successful chlorophyll production, which means photosynthesis. Most of the Earth's atmosphere is nitrogen, but that nitrogen cannot be taken in by plants. It has to be fixed by bacteria in the soil that pull nitrogen from the air and release it into the soil. This image here is indicating a symbiotic relationship between bacteria in the soil and plants performing photosynthesis. So basically the bacteria convert nitrogen into organic compounds that the plant can uptake, and the plant gives bacteria some of their photosynthetic products. So an exchange of nutrients and energy. So nitrogen is important because the nitrogen cycle is important because it brings in that nitrogen from the atmosphere and converts it into ammonia or ammonium. The soil bacteria can then convert ammonia and ammonium into nitrates that plants can use. Fossil fuels also produce nitrogen gas, as nitrogen is released when fossil fuels are burned. Rather than going through this whole cycle, I'm going to go ahead and let you read through it, write down the important steps, and just generally kind of walk yourself through this cycle. I don't expect you to know every single intermediate step, but you do need to know that we start with nitrogen gas and it has to be converted into ammonia and then into nitrates. And I realize there are a couple different forms of the ammonia and the nitrates. You're good to just know ammonia and nitrates as your keywords. And then you do need to know the role that bacteria and fungi have in this cycle. As always, I am happy to talk you through it during office hours if you have any questions. So just like phosphorus, nitrogen release into the environment is important for increasing the nitrogen release, which can artificially increase the nutrients available, which can in turn throw our ecosystem out of whack when you have organisms that are blooming when they're not supposed to. So again, fertilizer runoff from agriculture and lawns, etc., can cause eutrophication. Another problem is that excess nitrates in drinking water can be a hazard to infants. And also, when burning fossil fuels, those fossil fuels release nitric oxide, which can produce acid rain. Acid rain then essentially burns the plants that it falls onto.